Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And I was getting ready to pull out my meditation books to read some meditations over here today, and I thought, you know what, I want to roll through the comments from the last video that I did, the last few videos that I did, and see if anybody has asked any questions, if anybody wants me to share any life experiences with them, and I actually got a few comments, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, I could talk about this, or I could talk about that. But I was asked to talk about something to do with addiction and recovery. And as you guys know, I am super passionate about addiction and recovery, having been sober for over 29 years and really struggling with it before I got sober. Also dealing with my mother's addiction and then her getting sober 6 months after I did. You know, and having worked in addictions and things like that, it's probably the one thing in my life that I am the most passionate about. And, you know, it's interesting because I get a lot of emails and a lot of DMs from people asking me questions about, you know, what they should do for themselves or what they should do for a spouse or a child or a friend, things like that. Like, how can they help that person? What can they do? And it's always interesting because, you know, I've sat on both sides of the coin. I've been the addict and alcoholic, you know, before I got sober, attempting to get sober and staying sober. I've also been the family member and the friend of addicts and alcoholics before they got sober, struggling to get sober, getting sober, and afterwards, sometimes going back out there. I've had many people that I've known that have died from this disease. I think it's also important, and I say this quite a bit, it's also important to know that I also know quite a few people that died sober as well. My mother died sober. My two of my sponsors died sober just in the last few years. My mother would have had 13 years sober. She was a month shy of 13 years sober. My two sponsors were both, like, one of my sponsors was, I think, like 27, 28 years sober. My other, well, actually probably like 30 years sober. My other sponsor was like 41 years sober when he passed. So, you know, I think that's important to know that people do get sober, live great lives, and die. I talk a lot about people that I have known that have passed away from addiction, but I think it's also important to give that hope as well. I think hope is the one thing to a family member or a friend that you can never let go of. You know, my mom got sober at 51 years old, and I never thought she would have gotten sober. I can remember when I was in treatment, and my counselor was like, you know, you have to set boundaries with people that continue to use in your life, like friends and family and things like that. And I was like, my mom, and she was like, yeah, your mom. Like, you need to set boundaries with your mom. Your mom's a huge trigger for you, and things like that. And I can remember having that conversation with my mom about how I just couldn't be around her while I was in the early days of being sober, and she really struggled with that. Like, she really didn't understand it, you know. And I don't think that when we're in our active addiction, I don't even know that I really got it till probably 10 or 15 years sober. I don't think I understood the impact that I had on people in my life while I was using. I don't think unless you live through it on the other side, you really get how you are impacting other people, you know? And I don't think that my mom really understood, you know? My mom and I, we didn't drink a lot together. I mean, I can remember a few occasions at like a holiday, but that was like kind of a boundary that my mom always set. Like, she didn't like to drink with me, and she didn't think that it was appropriate, and she didn't like to do that. And so she knew that there had been incidences, you know, when I was growing up. But my mom kind of always remembered like the significant incidences, like the big moments. I don't think that she really realized that just talking to her on the phone at night when I could tell that she was tipsy really bothered me, or really made me feel unsafe in that relationship, especially if it was like a moment. Like, these are the small things that we don't talk about, I don't think, because we don't really have a language to talk about this. But I can remember, like, going through stuff, even when I was using, you know, I'm not, like, even when I was using, it wasn't like every day I was drunk 24 hours a day, you know, but even after that, I can remember, you know, like, there would be times that I wanted to talk to my mom, like I wanted advice from my mom, and I would call her, and I could tell, had been drinking, and it didn't feel safe. I think safe relationships, safe spaces are something that's really important for all of us, not just people in recovery. And so when we talk about how do we help that person, what we're really talking about is how do we develop a safe space between ourselves and that person? How do we set appropriate boundaries, I know a lot of people reach out to me because they really want to be helpful to their children, their spouses, their friends, their family, their neighbors and things like that, and they want to be as helpful as possible. And one of the things that I typically always say is, look into and possibly even at least try it a couple times. The sister programs of Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, which are 12-step programs for friends and family members of alcoholics and addicts. When you go to, for example, an Al-Anon meeting, Al-Anon is specifically for friends and family members of alcoholics, but there are also friends and family members of addicts there as well. When you go to an Al-Anon meeting, they are not going to teach you how to fix the alcoholic or the addict. They're not going to tell you little tricks and this is how you deal with it. What they're going to teach you is how to work on yourself. You're going to do a 12-step program around how you are in relation to having alcoholics and addicts in your life, right? So to work a program in Al-Anon means getting a sponsor, attending meetings, working steps on yourself. Al-Anon has a 12-step program as well, in relation. It's not about fixing the alcoholic or the addict. One of the things that you learn very early on in Al-Anon is that you have really no control over, an alcoholic or an addict in your life. You have very little control over that. And I think one of the things that's really, really helped me, through the years of knowing the basics of Al-Anon is the 3 C's of Al-Anon, that I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I can't control it. And I think it's really important to remember that. Those 3 C's have really, really helped me vitally in dealing with my mother's addiction, and her sobriety, I think. Just because people get sober doesn't mean that they turn into perfect human beings overnight. I think that's kind of a misconception too, right? You get sober and then you're like this perfect human being. That doesn't happen, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day whose relationship ended sadly, and, we were talking and they said to me, who I was when I got sober is not who I am all these years later, and I'm a different person today, and they're a different person today, and I think that's one of the fears of spouses a lot of times. When people get, when one partner gets sober and the other person, maybe they don't have an addiction issue, but they don't get sober, is what's going to happen to us when you get sober and change. I've seen it save a lot of relationships. I've also seen it, a lot of relationships end over that. A lot of marriages end because somebody gets sober and they realize they're not the same person that they were when they were using. We're just not, And so, for me to know those things that I didn't cause, let's just take my mother, for example. I didn't cause her addiction, okay? I can't cure her addiction. I know that. And I can't control her addiction. And I can't control what comes along with that. And I'm not just talking about, hand to mouth, picking up the drink. Yes, absolutely, we can't control that. There are things that we can do to try to help that along, but we can't control that, I also can't control all the behaviors that come along with it, and I think that that's really, really important. If my dad was sitting here right now, what he would tell you is, because my parents were very, very versed in, signs of addiction early on and things like that. I mean, laughing a little bit in retrospect because my mother was, I can remember my mom, going to outpatient programs and my mom coming home and, making a martini and, reading the paperwork and being like, this is really good information. I'm like, you don't get it, right? But, my dad, if he was sitting here right now, knowing what he knows today, he would say, I knew at 4 or 5 years old by your behaviors that you had the ism. I knew that something was coming down the road, right? And it's interesting because friends of mine that are in recovery that have kids, and let's say they have 3 or 4 kids, right, that are, ranging in ages, they'll say okay, I can tell that this one's going to be the one that's going to have problems because they can see those behaviors early on. Addiction is not just about a drinking issue or a drugging issue. It really has very little to do with that, I choose to work a 12-step program. A 12-step program is obviously not the only way to get sober. I honor any way that people choose to get sober because I just want people to stay alive and enjoy happy lives. Just because a 12-step program works for me does not mean that that's what works for everybody, But one of the things that we learn in 12-step programs is that drinking and drugging is but a symptom of our disease. It's really the way that we deal with the other issues in our life, right? And when you look at a 12-step program, alcohol and drugs are really only mentioned in the first step. The rest of the steps are about making amends, character defects, behaviors, doing inventory, being a better person, things like that. It really has nothing to do with drinking and drugging. Drinking and drugging are but a symptom of the disease of addiction, right? And I think that that's really important to understand and to remember. And so, you know, I think a lot of people struggle with that. And then what happens is, and this is always my fear, however people choose to get sober, right? Whether they choose to get sober on maintenance drugs or they choose to get sober on a 12-step program or a church or however, that for me, okay, and I can only speak for this alcoholic and addict, for me, when I put down the drink and the drug, I was a mess. Like, I had all this emptiness inside of me. I had all these issues inside of me. I had all this stuff that I had to work on, right? So I'm always very worried for the addict or the alcoholic that just, like, stops using, but they don't work or replace it with something else, like therapy or groups or 12-step meetings or church or something like that. Some way to fix internally what is wrong with us. Because there are things that are wrong with us or things that we have done in our active addiction where we have hurt other people, right? Now, that brings me to, like, the people around us, the friends and the family that are wanting to help in any way they can. But at the same time, that help is on a fine line of wanting to control the outcome, right? Because we're so fear. And you know, when we talk about, in 12-step programs, we talk about addiction, we talk about it being based in 100 forms of fear. Well, being a family member or a friend of an alcoholic or an addict is, the control comes not from a bad place. It comes from a form of love, and it comes from a form of fear. We want to control the outcome of the addict or the alcoholic. We want to help the addict or the alcoholic out of fear of them dying, out of fear of them going to prison, out of fear of them losing jobs, out of fear of them losing everything in their life. Like, that's why we want to control those things, right? But even though we attempt to do that, I think most people that know that are affected by an alcoholic or an addict, and you know, in 2024, I don't think there are most people that aren't in some way affected, either by a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, a family member, that aren't some way touched by an addict or an alcoholic in their lives, right? Like, they aren't somewhat aware of it. So then that leads us to, what do we do? Well, I got this comment on my video yesterday or the day before, and yeah, it's from yesterday. And I wanted to read this comment to you because I think, first of all, it's such an endearing, raw, heartfelt comment. But I think it's also where I was, like, with my mom in early sobriety, while I was also trying to maintain my sobriety, and also before that, and with friends of mine. I mean, I've been where this person is. And so this person shared, and like, whenever I read comments over here and address them, I always keep them anonymous. This person said, my son has been sober about 10 days. Which is amazing. Congratulations. Like, 10 days. First of all, I think, like, you know, when I get on video and I say I have over 29 years sober, right? Like, I mean, it's surreal to me. Like, I'm now, like, at the halfway mark. You know, I'm going up to 30. If I make it to December 17th, I'll have had 30 years of sobriety, which is, I mean, it's crazy to me. You know, like, it's like I've been sober more than half of my life, right? Like, and I think sometimes when I talk about it, and people, like, so many people just really are so happy that I talk about it and whatever, but there's a few people every once in a while that are like, God, why do you talk about this all the time? I mean, it's literally my entire life. I mean, I've been sober half of my life, more than half of my life, right? And so, but, you know, I can remember early days of being sober and being like 5 days sober, 10 days sober, 20, 30 days sober. And I can remember, like, going to meetings, and when somebody would get like a 30-day coin or, you know, a 60-day keychain or something like that, and I would be like, oh my God, like, I want that so bad. Like, I want that 60-day keychain or coin, right? Like, I want that. And that felt like attainable to me, right? At 5 days or 10 days sober. The people that had like 29 years sober like I do, I thought they were liars. I was like, they are straight up liars. There is no way that those people have not had a drink or a drug in 29 years. I do not believe them. I'm just trying to make it to 6 months or a year and get everybody off my ass, right? Really what happened was I just kept on going because I saw people that have maybe 30 days more than me. And I knew them and I believed them, right? And so I was like, well, if I have now 60 days and they have 90 days, maybe I can get 90 days, you know? And then all of a sudden I had 6 months. And I've shared this story before. I'll never forget walking out of the meeting. I got my 6-month token at the meeting. It was like a Sunday morning breakfast meeting that I used to go to at the treatment facility where I got sober. And I can remember walking out in the parking lot, and, you know, it was like a beautiful summer day, and I like held up my coin. I can remember it was really sunny outside. And I was like, this is the first time that I've ever done anything consistently for 6 months in my life. Anything. Let alone staying sober, right? And kind of reflecting on it in that moment, I was like, I have peace. Like, my life is not exciting today by any means, but I have peace of mind. People aren't worried about me all the time anymore. People aren't constantly calling me and checking on me to make sure that I'm alive or that I made it home. You know, people aren't like worried where I'm at. I'm not waking up places that I don't know. I'm not worried about my own safety. I'm not having to constantly, you know, keep things in check. And for me, it was like, it really took me 6 months before it really was like, wow, I'm like doing this thing, right? Like, I'm doing it. So those early days of like 10 days are really a miracle. 10 days is a miracle for somebody to stay sober, you know? I couldn't put 24 hours together before I got sober, let alone 2 days, let alone 4 days, let alone 10 days. I can tell you, I was probably, I mean, this is in all honesty, I was probably prouder of 10 days sober than I am of 29 years sober. Because at some point, it's just like you just do what you were taught to do, right? And it comes naturally at some point. 10 days sober was harder for me to get than 29 years sober. That's the truth, okay? You know, and anybody that has 2 days, 24 hours, 5 days, 10 days, 30 days especially, be so proud of your time. Anybody that's been there before will tell you, those are the hardest days. Those are absolutely 100% the hardest days, you know? I think as you get older in sobriety, you know, it's interesting because somebody, I don't know why I'm thinking this, but somebody commented on my video the other day, and they said something, I said happy birthday to somebody being sober, and they said that's such an interesting thing to say to somebody. I mean, that's what we say in sobriety. We say happy, you know, birthday, and, you know, whatever. Like, that's the language that I've always been taught that we use. I don't know, maybe in different states it's different, but in Indiana we say happy birthday to people, and there's a sobriety birthday and there's a belly button birthday, right? And belly button birthday is our natural birthday. I think that's what I was saying in a video, something like that. And they said, oh, that's interesting. I never heard of it that way. But, you know, it's interesting because when I look back on that, like, getting sober was really kind of a rebirth for me. It really was, you know? But the thing is that, you know, obviously stuff's going to happen in your life, you know, through the years and whatever. Sobriety, as we're taught, is a design for living. It teaches you ways to deal with the things that happen in life. You know, today, I have things that I deal with. You know, when something happens in my life, the first call is to somebody in my support system or my sponsor immediately. My sponsor is one of the first calls, if not the first call. You know, it's either usually her or my best friend, Tanya. And reaching out and asking people for support and what do I do in this situation and what should I do and things like that. And I'm so grateful for the people that I've had that have guided me through those really difficult times, you know. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. And then doing what other people have suggested to me. You know, nobody tells you what to do. You have to do this. I've never been told you have to do something. They're all just suggestions, right? Like, every one of my sponsors, and a sponsor is a guide through a 12-step program, every one of my sponsors has just said, if I were in your shoes, this is what I would do. Or this is what I suggest based on what I've gone through in my life. I've never had a sponsor, and I know that people probably have, because there's a million different ways to do things in 12-step programs. I have never been sponsored, and I think I've had 6 or 7 different sponsors in my life. I don't know how many, I could count them right now and tell you, but it doesn't really matter. I have never been sponsored by somebody that said, you have to do this. I've never been sponsored by somebody that way, right? I mean, and in fact, sponsors in 12-step programs would say, I mean, if you want to drink, go drink, you know? Like, if you want to come back, I'll sponsor you. Like, that's what a lot of people would say. There is no, like, forcing or telling people to do things. And if you're going to meetings that you're finding that, go to different meetings, because that's not the basic principles of a 12-step program. And I've never been told to do that. I've just been suggested things. And that's my first point of reference, you know, when I'm going through something today, is to talk to somebody, to take it to somebody else. And that's the power of a 12-step program, is 2 alcoholics or 2 addicts sharing something with somebody else, right? And that's what's gotten me to where I'm at today. I mean, simply enough. You know, we talk about this 1,000-pound phone that's so heavy that you don't want to pick it up and call somebody. It was that heavy in early days of sobriety. But I had to learn to do that, you know? Okay, so this comment said, my son has been sober for about 10 days. He has a full-time job, and they finally made the decision to put him on Antabuse. I guess it is rarely used. How do I trust that he is taking the medicine? He does get it off of my husband's dresser, but have never seen him take it. How do I build trust again? I have been lied to about everything for many years. I feel horrible that I don't trust him. I feel he needs to earn that trust, just kind of walking on eggshells, not knowing really what to do or if he is telling the truth. And I think it's such a powerful message, because what it says right there is that alcoholics and addicts, the behaviors are what's inherent to them. The lying, the betrayal, the not telling full truths, the stealing, the whatever, right? And that's really what this person is saying. She's saying that I don't trust my son because of past behaviors, of him lying to me, of not following through with things that he's going to say. That's inherent to an alcoholic and addict, okay? I think that my dad and my mom and my stepmom were probably more worried in early sobriety about those issues than they were about whether or not I was going to drink or I was going to go back out and drug. My dad was at the point where he was ready just to be done with me. If I were going to pick up again, I mean, if he had gotten another phone call where I was drunk or high or something, I mean, he would have been done. But that was like easy, right? Because he knew, like, if you're using again, I'm done with you. Like, I'm done. I can't help you anymore. I don't know what to do. You know, I've given you every treatment option that I can possibly can. It's up to you at this point, right? But like the lying and the betrayal, like that's what they didn't know what to do. I've shared this on other videos. I think it took my dad a good like 2 years to really start trusting me again, right? And I just shared this in a video not too long ago. I think I was like 10 years sober and I was going to Las Vegas for the first time, and I'll never forget having a phone call with my dad, and my dad was like, are you sure you're going to be okay? Like, you know, I mean, they drank a lot in Las Vegas. I was like 10 years sober at the time. Well, I can tell you it was 2001 and I got sober, so it would have been a little bit before that. But I mean, my dad was like worried about me going to Las Vegas, right? I've been in a lot of places where, you know, there's alcohol. And in fact, in 12-step programs, they tell us, like, if you have a purpose to be somewhere, you can go somewhere where there's alcohol, right? And that we will recoil from it like a hot flame, like a hand from a hot flame. And so, you know, for me, it's not about that. If I'm wanting to drink today and I'm craving to drink or use drugs, for me, it's really about looking at the deeper issues. What's really going on inside of me that I'm wanting to go to drinking? I'm not saying that every once in a while that, like, a drink doesn't sound good or, you know, whatever. Like, yeah, sure, you know, having a glass of wine with my husband every once in a while sounds like it might be fun. Having a beer on a boat, you know, we were just in Mexico. You think that it doesn't sound like fun? I mean, we were at this club. But, you know, and all these people are like getting drinks. I'm like, oh, it might be like fun to have a drink here and whatever. Sure, that goes, but I don't consider that necessarily craving. I don't know in early sobriety that I knew the difference between that, but today I don't consider that craving. Craving to me is like, I want to get drunk. I want to get effed up. And if I'm there in my head, then there are other things that are going on with me that I'm not really dealing with. Okay, that mentality of wanting to just mentally escape, which we all feel from time to time, but I'm talking about just not wanting to remember escape. Okay, like I was back in the day. That's inherent of bigger issues going on. I don't really want to get into a big discussion with an abuse and all those kinds of things. An abuse is a drug for people. It's specifically mostly, what I know is that it's mostly used for alcoholics and people that drink, and that if you drink on it, it will make you very, very sick to the point where, like, you have to go to the emergency room. That being said, one of the reasons why I am, like, I don't really get into the discussion of maintenance drugs like Vivitrol, Suboxone, Subutex, and things like that is because the only times I've really ever seen them be successful is when they are in conjunction with therapy or group therapy or 12-step programs or highly monitored by physicians. That's the only time that I've really seen maintenance drugs really work that well, and also working internally on what's going on with them. For me, I have known many, many addicts, if you're people out there that, especially if you know opioid addicts, that have greatly abused like Suboxone and Subutex, that they will like shoot up on the weekends and then during the week to get them through use Suboxone. I've known a lot of people that do that. I've also known a lot of people that have attended 12-step meetings and have used Suboxone over a period of years to, you know, like help them get sober and things like that. I don't doubt that. Like, I don't take that person's validity away. There's people in sobriety that will say that person is not sober. I don't necessarily, personally, that's not my fight. However, if somebody wants to get sober is up to them. All I'm saying is a maintenance drug alone, for me, personally, this is how I feel, and I know this is kind of a hot topic, but a maintenance drug for me will just take away the craving of using the drug. It will not fix internally what is going on with you. So it's like, you got to work on the other stuff, right? I have known people that have drank through, and I've known numerous people that have drank through an abuse, made themselves sick so that they can continue to drink. So it's not a fix, right? Will it keep people from drinking? Yeah, I've known people that it's kept from drinking before because they were so afraid that they were going to get so violently ill that they didn't want to, like, you know, go to the emergency room. I've also known people that, like, were on it and got so sick and then got through it and were able to drink on it. So, I mean, you know, I mean, any addict or alcoholic can find a way around anything that they're on if they really want to use, you know? So the thing for me is the question of, How do I trust that he's taking the medicine? Well, you don't trust that he's taking the medicine, you know? And again, I think that's where I won't go back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's like the fixing. We're constantly trying to like fix and control. You can't control that. Even if you put it in his mouth and said, open your mouth and swallow it, I mean, he might, you know, put it under his tongue and hide it in the back of it. He might cheek his meds. I mean, if you've worked with addicts and alcoholics, or you are an addict and alcoholic, you know how to cheek meds, okay? You hide it up in there, you know, I mean, we know how to do that stuff, right? So even if you're like trying to control, you can't control it, really, right? And so then the next question is, how do I build trust again? I have been lied to about everything for many, many years. I feel horrible that I don't trust him, and I feel he needs to earn that trust. So this feeling horrible that you don't trust him, I'm going to tell you this from an addict, okay? That is manipulation from the addict, guilt tripping you indirectly without even having to say a word, all right? I feel like when I got sober, I had everybody around me walking on eggshells because they were so worried of what they would say, when I had not been worried for years about whether or not I was bringing destruction to their lives. But they were so worried that any one thing they could say was going to get me high again. Okay, one thing that you need to know is you do not have the power, and I don't have the power. Nobody has the power to get somebody sober and to get somebody drunk, okay? I don't have that power, you know? Nobody is responsible for if I go back out and relapse. Not my husband, not somebody out there, nobody. Nobody is responsible for anything. That is my choice, okay? There is not a person out there alive, unless they like tied me down and, you know, injected me with something. There is not a person out there alive that can force me to use willingly on my own, okay? Nobody can get somebody else drunk or sober. Nobody can get somebody else drunk, and nobody else can get somebody else sober. That's on the addict or the alcoholic, okay? So whether you build trust with your son or not is not really, it's really not contingent upon his sobriety, period, okay? And I'll be honest with you, I think that my dad not trusting me in the early years of sobriety, I mean for many, many years, there are still things to this day that are safeguarded, you know, that I think like he'll always have in the back of his mind. I think that really helped me a lot. I think had my dad so quickly forgiven me and trusted me, I think that would have been dangerous to my sobriety. It would have been dangerous to our relationship. But what needs to happen is the honest conversations. Like my dad had to say to me, and thank God that he was, you know, honest enough to be able to have these conversations with you. I would love to trust you. I can't trust you right now. I don't know when I'm going to be able to trust you again. It might be several months. It might be several years. I can't tell you that, okay? And that's because of your actions, Peter. So you need to take responsibility for that, because I'm not going to feel responsible for not trusting my own son. That was your doing, all right? I needed to hear those things. When my dad was angry at me, my dad told me, I'm angry at you, okay? I loved you. I have done everything for you. I have trusted you. Nothing that my dad could say would make him responsible for me going back out there. And you're going to have to get to the point as a family member, a friend, that you don't own that. Because that is how we indirectly manipulate people as addicts and alcoholics when we're in active addiction. That's how we indirectly manipulate people as emotionally, right? That if I can get this person to feel this way, then I can get them to do what they want. Your responsibility, and I know you don't want to hear this, because I don't think anybody wants to hear this, and I didn't want to hear this when my mom first got sober and when she was using, is my responsibility is to take care of myself. My responsibility, and whether that's going to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or going into therapy, going into family therapy, my responsibility is to take care of myself. My responsibility is to learn the appropriate boundary setting. My responsibility is to take to somebody else, not necessarily always in that situation. I can't trust my son. And I'm feeling horrible about this. But that's self-protection for myself. And that person saying, yep, like another parent that's gone through this. Yep, absolutely you can't trust him. And you shouldn't right now. And that's completely normal. And you shouldn't feel bad for that. And you shouldn't, right? But you need to hear that. You need a support system around you of people that have gone through that. Our responsibility as family members and friends is to take care of ourselves. The responsibility of the addict and the alcoholic is to take care of themselves and to ask for what they need. Our responsibility is to return to them and say, well, I can do that or I can't do that. and should never overstep boundaries and should never do anything that will help them with their addiction. So you will never know if he's taking the antabuse, and I hate telling you that, but you just won't, you know? And you can't control his sobriety, and you can't control whether he takes it or not, but you can control whether or not you're taking care of yourself. I had to do that for myself with my mother's addiction and her sobriety. I've had to do that with other friends of mine. Sometimes that's meant I've had to step away until they could take care of themselves, because I had to realize I can't control this. I can't cure it, and I didn't cause it. And they got to work this out on their own. And I got to take care of Peter so that when they need me, I'm there for them. Anyway, I hope that helps somebody out there. I love talking about addiction and sobriety. So if you guys have any other questions, let me know in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.